Hi, I'm Debbie. Thank you for joining me on these little conversations, which remain an experiment for me during this time where most of us are stuck in our homes, but our hearts and our minds want to be outside. These conversations are my little way of sharing with you some of the amazing people that I've met in my life and want to get to know better. It's also an opportunity for us to learn, create something, and have fun. Today's guest is someone who I'm very excited to meet. She's an archaeologist from the country of Philippines. We're going to learn about this little cave that she has been working at and how she's connecting modern communities with people that lived a really long time ago. So let's go meet her. Hi,
Hi
Ellie.
there. Hi.
Tell us, what is it you do?
I am an archaeologist, and most of what I do, I spend most of my time with kids and trying to get them more in love with their places and their homes. And the idea behind that is that if you know more about your homes and where you grew up, you'd be much more excited about it, and you'd love it, and then you'd want to protect it pretty
Makes
much.
makes super a lot of sense.
Right?
Tell us about the journey for you. So the place that you're working now
Yeah.
is in El Nido,
Yes.
right? And what is your connection with that place?
So I first excavated there in 2015, and the project has been going on for almost 20 years now. So all of the kids in that area grew up with an archaeological site in their neighborhood, which I think is super cool. And the archaeological site, well, it wasn't, people knew about it before, but because we did a lot of digging, and that most of the people who live there are actually recent migrants. So there's not a very deep attachment to place. But now because of the kids who have never known anything uh, aside from a neighborhood that is an archaeological site, then that makes everything really, really cool. Um, I would want to grow up with an archaeological site in my neighborhood.
Had you visited several archaeological sites before that? Oh, this was your first.
It wasn't my first archaeological site, but I remember when we went there, it was just like the most amazing summer camp for me. So summer camps aren't really that popular in the Philippines, but that summer was so fun that it felt, and we were all really camping, and everything was just like so much fun for me that I wanted to make sure that it would be so much fun for everyone else too. Like I found the place really cool, and I wanted to make sure that all of the kids there knew how cool their neighborhood is.
So tell me, what was it about the caves that was so arresting for you?
I just really like the place. So the cave itself has 250 million year old fossils and the oldest cremation burials in Southeast Asia, and lots of archaeology over thousands of years. And then there are other caves in the valley that are also all archaeological sites. And then there's a mangrove forest. And then there's our all of these other little bits of exciting things all in that one area. And it was just like the coolest place for me.
So how big of an area is that? Like you're saying the mangroves and the caves and the other sites. So I'm trying to get a sense of the distance between the places. Do you just walk from one place to another, or
So from one cave to another, your only option really is to walk, and because there are farmlands in between where people plant rice and other vegetables and stuff. But to get to the mangrove forest, you have to walk quite a bit. Like it would be much better to take a motorcycle, especially now that it's so hot. Like you could walk it, but you might not be so happy once you get there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of like what Arena and I were talking about last week about when you visit a place for the first time. There are just some things like knowing where you're going that can make a big difference to the overall experience. And that makes sense with what you were talking about that summer camp, which was so fun. And also, it sounds like the place was really stimulating because there are all these different high contrast habitats. You have mangroves, you have archaeological sites, and you have the local villages as well around that place. Tell us more about the people that you met there, the local community.
So a lot of the people in our team who, do the various tasks have actually been working with us for over 10 years. So like my friends there, they can dig so well. They know the artifacts so well. And that's always been really cool to me. Um that they know that. They know all of these stories, and they have all of these stories about the archaeological project and them being so young when they first joined. And now some of them have children of their own, and pretty soon their kids will be part of the team as well.
Wow.
And that it's like the the archaeological project itself has its own heritage because it's just been there for so long.
I'm just trying to imagine and go back to what you're saying. This place is like 9,000 years old. Is that correct?
It's older, so the cave fossils are 250 million years old,
Sure.
and some of the artifacts that we found are over 10,000 years old.
And can you describe some of these artifacts for us?
So we have tiger bones and stone tools. Those are among the oldest artifacts that we have. And then we have later on the cremation burials, and then huge shell midden, like shells all across the entrance of the cave.
Wow.
And it's like a shell party. A
So
huge
that
shell.
tells us, the midden tells us their diet, right? So they were
Yeah.
collecting all this shellfish from the coast. What kind of shellfish makes up the midden mostly?
So there's a wide variety of shellfish that we get. And what's cool about it is sometimes we get, well, I think more than sometimes, that we get shells that we actually still really, have a lot of now. So you can sort of see the archaeological record, and then you see it for lunch at the dining table.
That's insane. So I understand about this cave, it is both a burial site as well as human habitation, right? And did that happen at the same time or different times?
So it was a burial site for a bit, and then that sort of stopped. And then it was a burial site again, thousands of years later. So in between those years, they were using it, people were using the cave for other purposes. And that makes it really cool, because then you realize like there was something about this cave that made it interesting to people again and again across generations. So somebody from 9,000 years ago, and then somebody from 4,500 years ago, and then a group from the 1800s, because that was the biggest burial site there is like a 17th, 18th century burials. And then, it's cool for us today.
How are the differences between the methods of burial over all those different times?
The oldest burials that we have are cremation burials.
And how old is that?
9,000. And then we have the later cemetery, which is the one in probably the 18th century. We're not so sure when it was, but there are quite a number of burials from that period, and they're not cremations anymore.
And you mentioned earlier something about tigers, a tiger fossil. So that has made me curious. Do we have any clues or ideas of what kind of animals existed on the island during that time?
So we don't have any tigers anymore. Do you have tigers in Singapore? No.
We did.
Yes.
They were hunted off
Oh.
the island. I think the last one was shot in the mid-40s. My grandmother, when she lived in the village in the forest, she told me that you would hear them, but she had never seen one, but she had heard them.
What?
Yeah, so they were unfortunately hunted to extinction. Do we know if the tigers that was found at your site? I think what was really interesting about Palawan, please correct me if I'm wrong, was it once connected to the northern tip of Borneo?
That's possible, yes.
And so
Thousands of years ago.
do we think that the tigers could have walked over that land ridge, or yeah, swam? Tigers like to swim. Or did those fossils arrive in trade? Was it a complete fossil? Was it just teeth? What was it? What did you
Okay, so
find?
we got 2 foot bones, which makes it interesting because it's possible that they actually just came as foot bones already, probably as part of some amulet, like some jewelry or a coat or something like that. So it's possible that the tiger didn't actually, walk his way there. But we don't know. There's still so much to find out.
And how old was that tiger fossil?
It's over 10,000 years. I'm not so sure about like the exact age. Definitely not as young as the 1940s tiger sounds in Singapore. Where was that? Where did she hear that? Where was she hearing that? Which
Where did she hear
forest?
that? My mother,
Yeah.
my grandmother.
Yeah.
So we used to live actually up until I was 8 years old. We lived in this village in northern Singapore called Nisun. And it was connected to the Central Catchment Nature Reserve. That's what it's called today. It's one of the last remaining primary forests in Singapore. Many people, I'm looking out my window. There are skyscrapers across the entire horizon. And no one can possibly imagine that this was a place where tigers roamed. There were even tapirs, Malayan tapirs. Yeah. And there is an offshore island now where you can still find porcupines. You can't find them on the mainland anymore. So we call it mainland, but it's really Singapore Island, which exists in the mouth of a big river that comes out of Malaysia. And what else do we have? We still have pangolins on the main island. We have leopard cats. We still have wild boar. I'm sure you're familiar with wild boar. What kind of animals are at your site?
So we have all sorts of Palawan animals. And Palawan animals, but I guess the most interesting one is the pantot.
What's that?
A pantot is is it a stink badger? It's a stinky animal. It smells.
So that is a Palawan animal. What else? What other animals have you got there?
What else do we have here? Oh, we have a few birds that are just in Palawan, like the Palawan hornbill. Wow. That's really pretty. And then we have quite a few more Palawan-only species because Palawan has a unique geological history in the Philippines. So it's quite a special island in terms of biodiversity. And it gets its own law.
What does that mean?
So it gets its own law in terms of protection of the island. And like they have an office that manages all of the activities in terms of the environment in Palawan.
Okay. So its own environmental laws. Is it also cultural laws, or?
It's in relation to like how you can conduct research on the island.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's a strategic environmental plan for Palawan, or is it special environment? One of those things, but it makes Palawan special, and that's really like it is a special island. It is a special place.
So you manage a museum at the site, doing outreach to the kids, like you were describing earlier. Tell us more about that.
There's a small museum a few kilometers away in the next village. It's really small, but otherwise there are no museums for 6 hours. So most of our kids haven't been to a museum actually. And so that concept at the beginning was, well, let's define what a museum is and what a museum is going to be like for us,
Wow.
which was both scary and exciting because then you're starting from scratch but also you don't know what you're doing. And and that was really nice. And then a lot of what we do is also trying to get everyone on board with thinking about, how do we want to protect this place and what's really interesting for you here. What are the things that you see in it? Because like archaeologists would always see the archaeology, and a biologist would always see the biology first, and a geologist would see the geology first. But it's interesting to see like what other people are actually seeing in this place and hearing like what do you want to protect, or like what's important for you here. So that's always nice.
Yes, and that's so important, especially in conservation of wildlife. Often conservationists go in and their main objective, and this is how this is very similar. I'm really excited talking to you about this because even though the field is so different, archaeology, really there are a lot of parallels because we're going into these sites where sometimes it may not be the priority of the communities that are most strongly associated with that place. So like conservation, for example, a good example are predators. Often conservationists want to protect predators, but at the same time, the local communities fear them, or they are most heavily impacted due to livestock loss or actually humans getting attacked by predators. And very rarely are people or are the conservationists going to those people and asking them what is important to them, and what do they want from either this interaction of whether they are conservationists or archaeologists or biologists or geologists. How are you making this site, which is thousands of years old, right? It's so beyond the human ability to conceive, like 9,000, 10,000 years old. There's just so many generations. How are you making that relevant to the community and the children today?
Okay, so I actually started by asking them to define their place because I was seeing it as an archaeological site, but I wasn't sure. And and you think, of course, you see it as an archaeological site, which would make me really happy. But then I wasn't really sure if that was how they saw it. So that was the point. That's where we started. I want to know what you think this place is and how you would define your neighborhood. And they were saying all sorts of things like our neighborhood is really beautiful and there are so many wonderful natural resources here. And of course, anytime a kid said our neighborhood is nice because there's a cave, I'd be like, yes. Like I'd be super happy. But then I was pretty happy with all of their answers, and they'd be like, I really like this place because it's beautiful and I grew up here and my family is here, and that is why I would want to protect it. And they'd say, and that is a way for us to think, okay, so what do we do now? How do we make this useful for you? How do we make the cave useful for you? And one of the things I really like doing is going up to the teachers. So sometimes I just like randomly drop in the school and be like, what would you want me to do today? Um, would you want me to do anything with the kids, or like would you want to visit the cave? And we asked that last year to the high school teachers, and then they were like, okay, we'll come visit. And then after a few days, like all of the teachers just came with their motorcycles and then just started driving in to the site. And we're like, now we want to learn more about the cave. And that was like the best day for me because what, they were interested and the teachers were asking all the questions and they wanted to be able to use the cave as a learning area for the students. So we don't really have so there's no museum and there's not a lot of materials because so they don't really have like a really good science lab or stuff like that, or a lot of books. but they do have all of these outdoor areas, and it was a way for, you see the science there, and you see the history there. It's all there, just right in front of you. And I really want people to be able to use it because it's a place where you can learn.
I really love what I'm hearing because in my mind, I'm trying to imagine all of these activities happening there. In the backdrop, you have an archaeological site, a cave where people have been buried for thousands of years. And in the foreground, we have children visiting a library, learning, a growing museum, an archaeologist facilitating the ancient world with the living world. And it almost seems as if the cave is coming to life once again. This is the habitation that is happening now, the habitation that you are creating. It's not happening inside the cave itself, obviously, but it has become the locum within which everything else is coming to life around. And that's just so fascinating. What have you learned from the kids that love the place, that say they really like the place? What is it about the cave that they have said they like?
I think one of the things that they really like about it is that it's the closest recreational area to them. So a lot of the things in El Nido, they're actually developed for tourists because it's a tourist town, and so there aren't a lot of things that are developed for the general public. And that was something that we really thought of when we were doing this, that we wanted to make sure that in the process of doing this, we know that our primary public are the people from the village. Everything that we do has to be something that you can enjoy and then others can enjoy as well. So it starts from you, like, you are our priority, everyone else also welcome, but we want to make sure that you are happy with this place and that you actually have, a recreational area here.
I really like the approach that you're talking about because, and again, I see some parallels to conservation, which often we see people being in conflict with the things that we're trying to protect. Um, Even archaeological sites, sometimes there are situations where they become a fortress. The local people are excluded from it. It becomes this prime tourist place. How do you balance that and preserving the site for archaeological research?
It's really difficult, and it takes a lot of thinking of, like, what is this decision aligned towards, or like, what is our primary focus, or what are we protecting here? For us, it's always been pretty clear that we want the community as our partners because we're only there for a few weeks a year, and they're there every day. So if you don't have them on board, then it seems pretty basic, actually, because these are they're the ones who interact with these sites every single day of their lives. So they have the most power to protect if they see why it's valuable. And that's why everyone has a part to play in protecting these sites. And that's just key. Is the key, I think, is how you think about the whole situation and who has a stake in it and who can really change things for the better.
What is the sentiment of the local community to the archaeology, the sites?
The archaeology has been very interesting to everyone. For a few years, there wasn't really a lot of information that was getting out. So that's also one of the things that we've tried to do, is like to get people to think that this archaeology does not belong to the archaeologists. This archaeology actually belongs to everybody. And it's not like our little secret or the archaeologist's archaeological site. It's actually our site to share. And also the information to share with you, so that you can, I like to think of, in a way, like telling these stories, and once a person is really interested, they would go home and tell another person about it. It's like gossip, right? Gossip spreads because it's interesting. A boring story would stop with a person you told. But then if something is interesting, it will go on to the next person and the next person. And by, actually sharing these stories out, we hope to like keep on making those ripples, or like archaeological gossip, to just spread that information, which makes everything much more exciting to everybody.
Yeah, exciting and also relevant, right? Um, because then by talking about it, the site becomes a part of the conversation that's happening at the place.
Okay, so first, how did you get to the Himalayas? And second, how did you end up studying wildlife diseases?
Great question. So the Himalayas, I was actually taken there through my work as a photojournalist. Um, I was sent there by a magazine that was based in Singapore, and I was doing stories about human development. So I was learning particularly about female education. Female education. What was really interesting is kind of like what you said in the beginning, like the whole concept of a museum never existed in the place. Imagine a place where female education didn't exist. The whole concept of girls going to school was foreign. And there's some communities that are still like that. The whole idea of a girl being literate is very strange. And so I was there as a journalist doing a story about the first generation of girls that were being educated. And for a lot of us, where going to school is almost part and parcel of life, you reach a certain age, you go to school, you don't think about it. Um, for these girls, it's completely life changing, not just for them, but for their families and their communities, because now a girl can ask questions, she can read text, she can talk about more than things that she can see and experience in her direct environment, because she can read books. And that was putting a lot of changes were happening in the families, in the family in which the girl lived, as well as in the communities. And I was there to document that change. So I was spending time with families and these girls, but I'm always curious, and in some can say I'm a busybody, or I like to put my nose in places. So I've always been interested in wildlife and conservation. So while I was there doing this education and development stories, I was looking around at the nature, at the people, at the other communities that I was not necessarily directly involved with, but just observing what are their interests, what are they doing. So a one-off assignment in Nepal turned out into a 12-year relationship. and and I just kept going back, meeting the communities, growing my relationships with them. And over time, what happened was I built a relationship with a particular Himalayan community, and I went there on sort of just a weekend assignment that I gave to myself, which was to look for red panda. You familiar with red panda? It's a tree. It's a fluffy creature, red in color. Looks like a raccoon, but red instead of gray and black. And they live in bamboo forests in the Himalaya. They're very cute. And because they eat bamboo, they're kind of sluggish, like pandas. If you've ever seen pandas, on YouTube, just sitting there eating bamboo all day. So red pandas kind of do that as well. Slow moving bamboo eaters. And so I went into a part of the Himalaya with the aim of photographing these red panda. And what happened was that, part of the process of looking for these red panda, I was going to the villages and asking them Where do you see them? What time do they come out? What do they do? So lots of interviews, talking to people. And then I learned that people see red panda very often, the communities that live in those forests. But unfortunately, one of the easiest way to see a red panda was when it was brought out into the village in the mouths of dogs. Because they're slow moving, these red panda, they're slow moving, they're very vulnerable to dog attacks, which are these dogs are running around all over the village. Some of them, most of them actually belong to people. They are shepherd dogs or they're pet dogs, companion dogs, but they're not fenced in or kept in the home and they're free to run around. And these red panda, they're very susceptible to a type of disease called canine distemper, which is like measles. So measles, as we know, in humans, it's a fatal disease. It impacts children. So there are many, and it's very contagious. You know, if somebody in your community has measles, it spreads really fast. So distemper is something like that. It's spread right now mostly in wildlife, and it's spread from dogs to wildlife, mostly mammals. So any kind of mammal. And I became curious about the impact, seeing that there are so many dogs there and knowing that they probably carry diseases. Now all of us know that, you know, a lot about diseases, right? During this pandemic, we're all becoming suddenly disease aware. All of us, even though we look healthy, can be carriers and are carriers of many pathogens. Sometimes we get sick, sometimes we don't. Dogs are the same. They're running around and they lick things, they take a poop somewhere or a pee somewhere, and all of these are opportunities for spreading pathogens. And so I was a journalist, as I told you, and because I was so curious about going into this disease question and also wanting to have greater impact to the community, also as a quantitative scientist, to really understand the dynamics of the ecology that's happening in the place, I wanted to arm myself with a new tool to serve the community. I actually went back to university to study disease ecology. So, and that was years ago. and I love it. I love, you know, coming from the two fields, one of photography and journalism, where I'm very, you know, aware and observant of things, also telling stories, interviewing people, learning people's perspectives, and now integrating that in this new tool and this new field of disease ecology, which interestingly often, especially in emerging diseases such as COVID-19, a lot when we're doing tracing, when we're trying to find out where a disease originates from, we interview people. Where did you go? What were you doing there? Who did you meet? And that skill is very super important. We're learning, you know, no matter how quantitative things become, something becomes about numbers and data and math. Really, you know, to investigate how things are behaving in our landscape, in the human landscape or physical landscape, it often comes back to what you're doing in the field, which is talking to people, engaging people, learning what they know. And it's been such a fun journey. Thank you for asking that question.
Actually, a lot of projects that you stick to for long periods of time, they were never the original project. They were like side projects. And then you sort of just notice along the way that, wait, I seem to be spending so much more time doing this. This is so interesting to me, even if I don't have to do it. And then you realize, oh, this is this is the thing. Like, it's actually the thing that's really interesting to me. And well, other things are also interesting. You know, I'm going to follow this path and see where it leads. And that was your story.
Yeah, and I'm often asked, you know, why did you change? You know, why did you change fields? But it's funny because for me, it doesn't feel like it's a change of field. It's just a new perspective, a new tool. It's like learning a new language, you know? It's not like you're giving up your old language. you're adding to the diverse group of languages that you know. And for me, that's super fun to be able to tap on those skills and integrate them.
And when you were telling the story, it seemed like it was such an obvious decision. Once you got to the point where, should I study? Of course, I'm going to study this. Or, of course, I'm going to come back here and ask more questions.
For me, the commonality between doing the journalism work and then the disease work is really, at the end of the day, service, I feel. Because why it was important for me to investigate the disease is because we want to look after the wildlife. There was a point to it. It wasn't so much just for the sake of what diseases are there, but if there is a disease there, we should know about it so that we can do something about it, and we should tell people about it. And the stories about the girls that were being educated, that was a life-changing historic moment in the history of the community, and it needed to be documented so that people were aware of the contrast of a time before girls were educated and after girls were educated.
I super love both stories.
What is the biggest thing you have learned through archaeology?
How important it is to listen. Like, throughout this process, while I've been telling a lot of stories to others, and I've been telling the story of archaeology, like, I think that the most important thing I do is actually when I'm not the one talking, and I'm just the one trying to take it all in, and trying to get the stories out of other people and to listen to them and think of what they're thinking of, because it's very easy to talk, but it's so much harder to actually listen to others and think about what they're actually saying.
So how did you learn that skill, or at which point did did it occur to you that, oh, I need to listen to people?
Maybe I got it in a way. So my dad's a bioethicist, and I think that contributes to like why I think listening is important. But because he does a lot of listening and less talking in his work, because he actually has to get the opinions of others to think of policies and things like that. And then sort of you just realize along the way that people, they want to listen to you for a bit. They'd be interested in your stories, but then after a while they want to tell their own stories. And when you listen to those stories, that's when they start to think that you actually see why they're important. When you're telling somebody something, then they see, a little bit like, oh, this person wants to tell me a story. But then when you're listening to them tell a story, then they're like, oh, this person is interested in, my opinions and like my life. And then you see how the other person values you because they're listening to you. And you feel valued because somebody is listening to you. And that's important.
This has been a thoroughly, thoroughly wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank
All right.
you.
Enjoy the rest of your tropical day.
Bye.
Bye.